Generals Die in Bed. Chapter 6. Bombardment. Part 2. There is a call for volunteers for a brigade raid. 100 men are to go over. Some of our section offer themselves, I among them. There is a rumor that the volunteers will receive 10 days' leave either in Paris or London. We stand in the dugout, which is battalion headquarters. We feel quite important. The colonel is giving us last instructions. We are to destroy the enemy's trenches, and we are to bring back prisoners. We are to have a 2-minute preliminary bombardment in order to smash the enemy wire and to keep the sentries' heads down. We are to rush the trenches as soon as the fire lifts, and drop depth charges into dugouts. At the end of 5 minutes, red flares will be lit on our parapets. This will be the signal that it is time to return, and will show us the direction. The raid is to take place shortly after midnight. We are each given a sizable shot of rum and sent back to company headquarters. At midnight, we start on the way up to the front line. We each carry a pocketful of ammunition, a few Mills grenades, and our rifles. All our letters, paybooks, and other means of identification are left behind. I have left my papers with Cleary. The rum has made me carefree and reckless. I feel fine. We are lying out in front of our wire, waiting for the signal to leap up. It is quiet. Now and then a white very light sizzles into the air and illuminates the field as though it were daytime. We lie perfectly still. Over in the German lines we hear voices. They are about 50 yards from where we now lie. I look at the phosphorescent lights on the face of my watch. 2 minutes to go. McLeod, the officer in charge of the raiding party, crawls over to where we lie and gives us a last warning. Remember, he whispers, red flares on our parapets is the signal to come back. In that instant, the sky behind us is stabbed with 1,000 flashes of flame. The earth shakes. The air hisses, whistles, screams over our heads. They are firing right into the trenches in front of us. Clouds of earth leap into the air. The barrage lasts a minute, and then lifts to cut off the enemy's front line from his supports. In that moment, we spring up. We fire as we run. The enemy has not had time to get back on his firing steps. There is no reply to our fire. We race on. 50 yards, 40 yards, 30 yards. My brain is unnaturally cool. I think to myself, this is a raid. You ought to be excited and nervous. But I am calm. 20 yards. I can see the neatly piled sandbags on the enemy parapets. Our guns are still thundering behind us. Suddenly yellow, blinding bursts of flame shoot up from the ground in front of us. Above the howl of the artillery, I hear a man scream as he is hit. Hand grenades! We race on. We fire our rifles from the hip as we run. The grenades cease to bark. 10 yards. With a yell, we plunge towards the parapets and jump, bayonets first, into the trench. 2 men are in the bay into which we leap. Half a dozen of our men fall upon them and stab them down into a corner. Very lights soar over the trench, lighting the scene for us. We separate, looking for prisoners and dugouts. Depth charges are dropped into the underground dwellings and hiding places. The trench shakes with hollow subterranean detonations. Somewhere nearby, a machine gun comes to life and sweeps over our heads into no man's land. The enemy artillery has sacrificed the front line and is hammering the terrain between their lines and ours. Green rockets sail into the black sky. It is the German call for help. The whole front wakes up. Guns bark, yelp, snarl, roar on all sides of us. I run down the trench looking for prisoners. Each man is for himself. I am alone. I turn the corner of a bay. My bayonet points forward, on guard. I proceed cautiously. Something moves in the corner of the bay. It is a German. I recognize the pot-shaped helmet. In that second, he twists and reaches for his revolver. I lunge forward, aiming at his stomach. It is a lightning, instinctive movement. The thrust jerks my body. Something heavy collides with the point of my weapon. I become insane. I want to strike again and again, but I cannot. My bayonet does not come clear. I pull, tug, jerk. It does not come out. I have caught him between his ribs. The bones grip my blade. I cannot withdraw. Of a sudden I hear him shriek. It sounds far off, as though heard in the moment of waking from a dream. I have a man at the end of my bayonet, I say to myself. His shrieks become louder and louder. We are facing each other. 4 feet of space separates us. His eyes are distended. They seem all whites, and look as though they will leap out of their sockets. There is froth in the corners of his mouth, which opens and shuts like that of a fish out of water. His hands grasp the barrel of my rifle, and he joins me in the effort to withdraw. I do not know what to do. He looks at me piteously. I put my foot up against his body and try to kick him off. He shrieks into my face. He will not come off. I kick him again and again. No use. His howling unnerves me. I feel I will go insane if I stay in this hole much longer. It is too much for me. Suddenly I drop the butt of my rifle. He collapses into the corner of the bay. His hands still grip the barrel. I start to run down the bay. A few steps and I turn the corner. I am in the next bay. I am glad I cannot see him. I am bewildered. Out of the roar of the bombardment, I think I hear voices. In a flash, I remember that I am unarmed. My rifle, it stands between me and death, and it is in the body of him who lies there trying to pull it out. I am terrified. If they come here and find me, they will stab me just as I stabbed him, and maybe in the ribs, too. I run back a few paces, but I cannot bring myself to turn the corner of the bay in which he lies. I hear his calls for help. The other voices sound nearer. I am back in the bay. He is propped up against his parados. His rifle is in such a position that he cannot move. His neck is limp, and he rolls his head over his chest until he sees me. Behind our lines, the guns light the sky with monster, dull red flashes. In this flickering light, this German and I enact our tragedy. I move to seize the butt of my rifle. Once more we are face to face. He grabs the barrel with a childish movement which seems to say, "You may not take it, it is mine." I push his hands away. I pull again. My tugging and pulling works the blade in his insides. Again those horrible shrieks. I place the butt of my rifle under my arm and turn away, trying to drag the blade out. It will not come. I think I can get it out if I unfasten the bayonet from the rifle, but I cannot go through with the plan, for the blade is in up to the hilt, and the wound which I have been clumsily mauling is now a gaping hole. I cannot put my hand in there. Suddenly I remember what I must do. I turn around and pull my breechlock back. The click sounds sharp and clear. He stops his screaming. He looks at me, silently now. He knows what I am going to do. A white very-light soars over our heads. His helmet has fallen from his head. I see his boyish face. He looks like a Saxon. He is fair, and under the light I see white down against green cheeks. I pull my trigger. There is a loud report. The blade at the end of my rifle snaps in two. He falls into the corner of the bay and rolls over. He lies still. I am free. But I am only free to continue the raid. It seems as though I have been in this trench for hours. Where are the red flares? I look towards our lines and see only the flickering orange gun flashes leaping into the black sky. The air is full of the smoke of high explosives. Through the murk I see 2 heads coming out of the ground. It is an entrance to a dugout. The heads are covered with the familiar pot-shaped helmets. We use a more vulgar term to describe them. Apparently this was a dugout our men had overlooked. I cock my breechlock and raise the rifle to my shoulder. The first one sees me and throws his hands high into the air. "Kamerad! Kamerad!" he shouts. His mate does likewise. Suddenly the sky over in the direction of our lines becomes smudged with a red glow. "The flares! The signal to return! Come with me!" I shout into their ears. I start to drag them with me. They resist and hold back. They stand with their backs glued to the side of the trench and look at me with big, frightened eyes. They are boys of about 17. Their uniforms are too big for them, and their thin necks poke up out of enormous collars. "Nicht schießen! Bitte, nicht schießen!" the nearest one shouts, stupidly shaking his head. I reassure him. I search them for weapons, and then sling my rifle over my shoulder as an evidence of good faith. We start off down the trench towards a sap which leads out into no man's land. We are back in the bay, where he with my bayonet in his ribs lies in the corner. I pass him quickly, as though I do not know him. The one nearest to me throws himself on the dead soldier. I spring upon him. The red flares color the sky. It is the signal to return, and here this maniac tries to keep me in this trench forever. I grab him by the slack of his collar and start to tear him away. He looks up at me with the eyes of a dog and says, "Mein Bruder, eine Minute, mein Bruder." The red flares grow brighter in the sky over my shoulder. The other prisoner looks at me with sad eyes and repeats, "Ja, ja, das ist sein Bruder." "Schnell!" I shout into the kneeling one's ears. He nods and takes a few letters and papers from his brother's pockets and follows me into the sap. The earth leaps into the air on all sides of us. I point towards our lines and we begin to run. The field is being swept by machine gun fire. I do not see any of our men. We are alone. We run and stumble over stray bits of embedded barbed wire. We pick ourselves up and run again. It is miraculous how we can live, even for a moment, in this fire. A shell explodes about 20 yards from us. The brother falls. We pick him up and carry him into a discarded communication trench that runs from the German lines to ours. The fire grows fiercer. We can distinguish shells of every caliber. The air begins to snarl and bark over our heads. They are using overhead shrapnel. We stop and feel in the darkness for a funk hole or a dugout. We find a hole in the side of the trench and wait there while the storm of living steel rages about us. It is black inside. The unhurt prisoner pulls a stub of a candle out of his tunic pocket. I light it. It flickers with the force of the nearby detonations. The brother hugs his wounded leg and rocks to and fro with pain. We examine him. He has been hit in the calf of his right leg. We take the emergency dressings from our tunics and pour iodine into the open hole of his flesh. He winces and then shrieks as the stuff eats into his tissue. I apply a gauze and his mate starts to bind the wound with bandages. By signs and with my meager German, I make them understand that we will wait here until the force of the barrage abates. I pull out a package of cigarettes and offer them one each. We light up from the candle and sit smoking. I point to the wounded one's leg and ask him how he feels. He shakes his head and moans. "Ach, ach, mein Bruder!" He points back towards the German lines. He begins to weep and talk rapidly at the same time. I cannot understand. I can distinguish only two words, Bruder and Mutter. The other prisoner nods his head solemnly, affirming what his comrade says. "Ja, ja, das ist wahr. Das ist sein Bruder, Karl." I sit looking at them silently. There is nothing to say. How can I say to this boy that something took us both, his brother and me, and dumped us into a lonely, shrieking hole at night? It armed us with deadly weapons and threw us against each other. I imagined that I see the happy face of the mother when she heard that her two boys were to be together. She must have written to the older one, the one that died at the end of my bayonet, to look after his young brother. "Take care of each other and comfort one another," she wrote, I am sure. Who can comfort whom in war? Who can care for us? We, who are set loose at each other and tear at each other's entrails with silent, gleaming bayonets. I want to tell these boys what I think, but the gulf of language separates us. We sit silently, waiting for the storm of steel to die down. The wounded one's cigarette goes out. I move the candle towards his mouth. He puts his thin hand to mine to steady it. The cigarette is lit. He looks into my eyes with that same doggish look and pats my hand in gratitude. "Du bist ein guter Soldat," he says, his eyes filling with tears. I pat his shoulder. With his hand he describes a circle. The motion takes in his trenches and ours, the thundering artillery, the funk hole, everything. In a little boy voice he says, "Ach, ein ist schrecklich, schrecklich."